What if I told you that the most dangerous car on the third day in Bahrain was not the one that led the timetable, but the one that was hiding 3/10 per lap in real race pace? Porque mientras todos miraban la vuelta rápida, McLaren estaba construyendo algo mucho más inquietante. Un coche que no necesita un giro perfecto para marcar diferencias, sino que las acumula, vuelta tras vuelta, stint tras stint. On the third day of testing we saw something that cannot be seen in a headline, but that in the race can decide championships. The third day of testing in Bahrain began with a deceptive feeling. La mayoría de titulares giraban alrededor de quien había marcado el mejor tiempo absoluto, quien había mejorado en el segundo sector o quien parecía esconder combustible. Pero lo verdaderamente importante no estaba en la tabla, estaba en los stints largos, en la estabilidad, en la repetición consistente de vueltas dentro de una ventana muy estrecha. And that was where McLaren began to send the first serious message to the rest of the grid. Mientras varios equipos alternaban configurations buscando picos de rendimiento, el coche papaya parecía seguir un programa metódico, casi clínico. No se trataba de una vuelta espectacular, sino de entender cómo el monoplaza se comportaba cuando la carga de combustible bajaba, cuando el neumático entraba en phase de degradación térmica y cuando la gestión híbrida exigía equilibrio entre recuperación y despliegue. It was in that scenario that the narrative of the famous 3/10 began to take shape, not as a media hype, but as a logical consequence of a car that maintains its aerodynamic platform stable for longer than its rivals. The technical analysis of the document makes it clear that this advantage is not associated with a single isolated element, but rather with a package focused on the suspension and height management of the car. In Bahrain, a circuit that especially punishes traction in slow corners and stability under heavy braking, this solution takes on even greater value. When the car does not pitch sharply at corner entry and keeps the diffuser working in a constant range, the pressure loss is lower, the tire suffers fewer microslips, and the driver can repeat references without any problems. On the third day it was clear that McLaren did not need to push the car to the limit to set competitive records. Stability on corner entry and clean traction on exit generated a very consistent pattern. It was not the most nervous car or the most visually spectacular, but it was the most predictable. And in modern Formula 1, predictability is a brutal advantage. It allows you to attack when the fuel gets low, it allows you to adjust the balance without the car radically changing its behavior, and, above all, it allows the driver to trust. Oscar Piastri fit naturally into that scheme. Su estilo de frenada tardía, con una liberación progresiva del pedal y una transición suave hacia el apoyo delantero, armoniza con un coche que mantiene estable el eje frontal. En conditions donde otros monoplazas mostraban ligeras perdidas del tren trasero o variaciones en altura al pasar por pianos, el McLaren parecía mantener su centro aerodinámico en una zona controlada. That stability not only improves lap time, it also reduces irregular wear and protects performance in the final laps of the stint. Lo que realmente diferenció a McLaren en ese tercer día no fue la velocidad máxima en el sector más brillante, sino la forma en que el coche que menos vuelta tras vuelta. While some teams started strong and then suffered a progressive decline in their averages, McLaren's pace remained within a narrow margin. This is where those theoretical 3/10 per lap appear in optimal conditions. Not as a punctual explosion, but as a silent sum. The rest of the teams also showed strengths. Ferrari left signs of good performance in short runs, Mercedes worked intensely on correlation and balance adjustments, and Red Bull continued to refine its operating window. But none conveyed the sensation of a completely round car that McLaren projected on that third day. There was no drama, there were no shocks, there was no need to look for excuses. There was method. And that method is what makes the third day in Bahrain more than just a day of testing. It was the moment when it began to be understood that McLaren has not only evolved its concept, but has refined it until it becomes an extremely efficient tool in real racing conditions. The key is how the car manages its aerodynamic platform. The document makes it clear that the supposed advantage does not come from an isolated element, but from a philosophy focused on the suspension and height control of the car. On a circuit like Bahrain, where braking is violent and low-speed traction punishes the rear axle, keeping the car stable during the load transfer phase is essential. And that was exactly what McLaren showed on that third day. While other teams experienced visible variations in the car's behavior, slight bounces during braking, more aggressive movements of the rear axle when exiting corners, the McLaren seemed to move within a very controlled range. There were no dramatic spikes, no exaggerated steering wheel corrections, no abrupt loss of grip. This stability allows something that is worth gold in F1, repeating references with millimeter precision. But here comes the second factor that feeds the 3/10 narrative: integration with hybrid management. It's not just about aerodynamics or pure mechanics, but about how the car combines engine braking, energy recovery, and brake distribution so as not to destabilize the platform. On the third day, it was seen that McLaren could attack the corner entry without compromising the exit phase, something that in Bahrain usually penalizes a lot if the car is not perfectly balanced. The result is not a miraculous return. It's something more dangerous, a lower average for 20 consecutive laps. When the tire begins to lose thermal performance, when graining threatens, when the fuel drops and the car changes its center of mass, the McLaren did not seem to undergo a radical transformation. He stayed within his ideal window longer than his rivals. And that's what turns a 10th here and a 10th there into a cumulative difference. Oscar Piastri played a decisive role in that scenario. Its driving style fits with a car that allows deep braking without the nose collapsing aerodynamically. By progressively releasing the brake, it maintains load on the front axle just long before transferring it to the rear in traction. If the car responds linearly, the driver can push without going into defensive mode. And that was what he conveyed on the third day: confidence. Meanwhile, the other teams showed partial strengths. Ferrari could shine in certain sectors. Mercedes looked competitive at certain times during the stint. Red Bull continued to fine-tune its overall balance. But none left the feeling of having such a coherent package between mechanics, aerodynamics, and energy management as McLaren. And here's the crux of Act 2. When a car is fast only under ideal conditions, it depends on circumstances. When a car is stable over a wide range of conditions, it is much less dependent on context. And that is exactly what McLaren hinted at in Bahrain, that it's not like they found a magic button. They have built a car that maintains its performance when others begin to deal with wear, temperature, and energy. This is where those 3/10 per lap are born in optimal conditions. Not as an isolated blow, but as a structural advantage. The third day of testing in Bahrain did not define a definitive grid, but it did leave something much more valuable: a trend. And when a structural trend appears in Formula One, the teams do not ignore it. They study it, fear it, and try to replicate it. Because what McLaren showed was not simply a competitive car, but a concept that seems to have found coherence between aerodynamics, suspension, and energy management. The document is clear in pointing out that the advantage is not in a magic lap, but in the sustained differential when the car is in its perfect height and temperature window. That in Bahrain was evident in the long runs. But transferred to the championship, it implies something even more dangerous: consistency on Sunday. And in a long season, consistency wins titles. Oscar Piastri, in particular, represents a key factor in this equation. If the car maintains a stable platform, its aggressive braking and clean transition style allows it to maximize that technical architecture. And if he manages to chain those 3/10 lap after lap in real racing conditions, we are not talking about a small advantage. We talk about strategic control. We talk about being able to decide when to attack and when to manage. The third day in Bahrain also left another important reading. McLaren did not seem to be at the limit of its concept. He didn't feel like he was squeezing the car to prove something. On the contrary, it conveyed margin. And in the preseason, having margin is a silent statement. It means that the car responds to changes, that the correlation between simulator and track is strong, that the team understands its tool. And that's where the rest start to worry. Because if those 3/10 are born from a solid technical base and not from an extreme configuration, they are not easily eliminated with a simple update. They require rethinking concepts, adjusting geometries, reviewing suspension philosophy. And that is not corrected in 2 weeks. If those 3/10 are maintained when the championship begins, we will not be talking about a specific surprise. We will be talking about a real candidate for strategic dominance from the first race. And it all began quietly on the third day of testing in Bahrain. He left something much more valuable: a silent warning. McLaren wasn't the loudest car, it didn't need a stratospheric time to dominate headlines, but it built something much more important than a perfect lap. It built consistency. In Bahrain, we saw a McLaren that did not fall sharply in the second or third stint, that did not seem to fight against its own degradation, which allowed the driver to repeat references without entering survival mode. And when a car allows that, the driver can attack with confidence. Oscar Piastri did not need to force desperate maneuvers. He just strung together solid turns within a very stable window. Bahrain did not give us absolute certainties, but it did give us a clear clue. McLaren has found stability where others are still seeking balance. And in this era of Formula One, stability is power. Leave me in the comments what you think about all this.